Welcome back to the channel. In this episode, we're taking a look at the best or top decks in the Pokemon TCG currently. I picked out the top 10. I think you could probably change in maybe Arceus, some variants in here. I think in general, these are sort of the 10 best lists currently. We're going to rank them, look at some deck lists, and give you guys some ideas. If you're just getting into competitive or you're trying to think what to play, we're going to look at some matchups, some reports, and just break down which decks are doing the best. Now, it's worth noting things do always change in TCGs, so if one tournament is dominated by one deck, one of these is going to be higher than the next one. We're going to try and just look at them in general and just see how well they play. We're going to look at what's future-proof, so what's going to be good moving into the next format, and just break down what makes these decks good. So we're going to go through the list in the order here, so you can see we've got Giratina Lost Zone first. A deck I absolutely hammered when it came out. It's all I played. I played nothing but Lost Box. I've gone completely away from it now. I'm a little bit tired of it. It's still absolutely dominant. Just yesterday, Pittsburgh Regionals was won by it wasn't Giratina, but it was a Lost Box deck with Kyogre, Raikou, and all the goodies. So we are going to take a look first at its matchup. So as you can see on here, all of this is on Trainer Hill. It's a website I found recently. Somebody shared it on Twitter, and it's just absolutely chock full of stats and interesting meta breakdowns and all of that stuff. So go check them out if you do want to see more of it. That's where we'll be looking today. I am trying to leave their logo wherever I open stuff, because whenever you find cool stuff like this, it's important to share it and make people know where it's from. So we're going to look, like I say, at Giratina first. So we've got Giratina here. Goes pretty well into Charizard. Obviously can take a one-hit knockout using its VStar ability, so that makes a lot of sense. Into Chien-Pao back Excalibur. That seems slightly high for me. I would say it's closer around the 50-50, having played a ton of Chien-Pao. But it makes sense, obviously, with those lower HP stuff and Sableye. Obviously, you can just take a knockout with Giratina quite easily into Chien-Pao as well. Good into Mew. Yeah, that's fairly expected. Again, taking those easy knockouts. Gardevoir's slightly lower. I think that's with the Cresselia, which really, it can make it a little more difficult. Obviously, the massive amount of single prize attackers Gardevoir has, it can make it difficult to trade with. Obviously, they can just take easy knockouts with reversal and just piling that energy onto those Gardevoirs. Obviously, can make it very difficult to deal with. Inteleon Urshifu is a deck I've not really had much experience with playing or playing against, so I'm going to go off the data on that one, but apparently it's not great into that. Makes some sense. Obviously, having to have all that stuff on your bench is very easy for Inteleon Urshifu to take some snipes. Not great into Lost Zone. Again, just single prize attackers a lot of the time, or they can finish off with Kyogre, taking a ton of easy knockouts. Miraidon is a deck that's just absolutely stormed the format recently, and obviously it can set up very quickly, so that can be quite a trouble for Lost Box. Very good into Palkia and not great into single strike Lugia. You will notice Lugia has some of the best matchups, which is why we saw it heavily at Pittsburgh. But obviously, with things like Miraidon coming up in popularity, we might see a change in that. I do think they're probably going to have to adapt somehow. Maybe a Dunsparce. It doesn't feel great. Your bench is already jam-packed of stuff. Not really sure what the answer there is, but we'll get on to those decks as we do. We're just looking at Giratina right now. So let's look at a deck list. So here's the deck list I've pulled up. This is just a recent one from one of the recent tournaments. Fairly standard list, the 3-3 Giratina, obviously with Sableye and Cramorant to help. The Snorlax is in there as well. Very consistent line of what they're playing. A lot of 4-ofs. A lot of what you would expect, really. Maybe slightly small on path. I'd like to have at least 3 in there. And then generally, they just take knockouts very easily. With stuff like Star Requiem, they can knock out anything in the game. There is always the argument of whether to play Water Energy or not. In this case, they have. So they've got the option of Radiant Greninja as well, which I personally prefer. I think that's just such an impressive attack, especially into some of these low HP decks. So Giratina is in a fairly good place in the game. I don't know if anything would be an S tier for me. I wouldn't say if you want to win, play this deck. And S tier should really be held for like the absolute best of the best. So I think Giratina, anything lower than an A would be disrespecting how powerful it is. I still think it's one of the top decks around. Next up, we've got Gardevoir, my personal favorite deck in the current format. This, for me, would maybe be the only one you could argue an S, because it's just I would say a lot of these matchups, even though there are different numbers, none are really skewed. I mean, Palkia and Single Strike is really bad apparently. I guess it makes sense with obviously the weakness in Single Strike. Not sure why Palkia is so bad. Obviously you can trade up with your Gardevoirs into that. They can set up very quickly, so it can be hard to sort of stream against them. But yeah, I'm not really sure on that one. I guess the Greninja causes you a headache as well. They've got Chien-Paos. I think the Palkia matchup's probably a little better than that suggests. I do appreciate Single Strike Lugia can be very awkward to deal with. In general, like I say, Gardevoir comes down to the player a lot of the time. It can be those small sort of plays and variations and deck choices of each player. So I do think Gardevoir is a fairly strong choice going into pretty much any matchup, which is why we are going to look at a deck list, but it could probably be S. I'm going to put it at the top of A for now. But let's take a look at a deck list. The cards you can't see here, there's a 1 Artisan, 1 Clap Stadium, 10 Psychic Energy, and 2 Reversal. This is obviously Tord's list from Worlds. Very similar to what I'm playing at the moment. I think there's only 1 or 2 card variations, and again, they just come down to preference. I've switched out a Research for a Worker, just to have that extra removal of Path, as it's so popular now with Miraidon, with Giratina and other things. So it's nice to have that other option. It just gives me 4 options I can play. Then obviously with Power Pad, I can reuse it as well. But yeah, there's a lot you can do with this deck. Obviously, you've got the Zacian for those big knockouts. You've got Gardevoir to trade with single prizes. You've got Cresselia, which can snipe stuff on the bench and remove damage on your Pokemon. So if Sableye spread in or Greninja's attacked into a few things, it is good just to move some of that damage back onto them. And they can't quite take those knockouts they need to when they need to, which is why I really like that card in this deck. I think Cresselia is essential. There are some stuff coming up with like Jirachi and things, which is going to change how impactful that kind of thing is going to be. But for now, it's a very powerful deck. And like I say, gives you a lot of options and a lot of chance to win into most decks, which is always good. Next up is Lost Zone, a few variations on this one, but we are going to look at a list that has just won the Pittsburgh Regionals. So this is Andrew Estrada's list, and he's taken it all the way and took first place. We've got 5 Water, 3 Psychic, and 3 Electric. Just can't quite make them out on the graphic here. Absolutely incredible run. I did watch it. I was watching all of it from home. And yeah, it's so fun to see this deck in action. It's more fun to watch it than play it, because it can be quite stressful getting all of these small plays right. The amount of times I've messed up on the Pokemon Live client with this deck is unbelievable. To the point where I don't really play it. Like, I would love to play this deck. I do think it's just a deck where if you do what you need to do, you're going to win, which is always a good thing. Like, you're not really impacted too much by your opponent. You just need to do your thing, get it all off, and most of the time you're going to come out with a victory. Obviously, that's not always the case in the game, though. There's a lot of things in the way. A lot of stuff your opponent can do to really mess you up. So I just think it's a really powerful list when it does what it needs to do. So there's a lot to like about this. I love the Kyogre. I love the early Dragonite and Raikou. There's a lot of options, especially with Hawlucha and Greninja, because you can attack with it in this deck, the Sableye. There's a lot of plays where you can set up just game-winning scenarios. These checkmate moments, it's just, yeah, it's a good deck. It's a difficult deck to pilot, but let's take a look at a few of its matchups here. So this is kind of difficult because there's a ton of Lost Zone box variants. There's obviously variants with Charizard and other things, but in general, if you just take a look, it's good into almost everything. There's stuff like Inteleon where it can struggle, obviously, and Single Strike Lugia. Again, I think that's going to come down to what variation you play. But in general, it's got a pretty good matchup into most things, which is a good reason to play the deck. Having good matchups is the best reason to play it. Personally, I think it's got to be A. I think it's higher than Giratina. If I was going to play one, it would be the box rather than Giratina. So I'm going to put it in just in between those. Do we drop Giratina down? I'm just trying to think if I would put anything else. I don't think anything else is... No, I think Mew would go into A. We're going to knock Giratina down. Nothing's going to go above this in B. I think Fusion Mew is a better choice, and it's just proven itself over and over again. Despite the amount of stuff there is to counter it, I think that, yeah, I'm happier with that. Let me know in the comments any changes you would make, but yeah, let's move on to Miraidon, the new kid on the block. It's been absolutely dominating. It's been playing Path as variants. Jesse Parker didn't play Path, he played Beach Court and a few variations. It's just winning. This deck is doing very well. Just to take a look at its matchups then, Miraidon down here. So not great into Charizard. Obviously, it can be very difficult to take a knockout into Charizard. And when you get those first early knockouts, Charizard is just going to tear through your deck. Great into Chien-Pao, great into Fusion Mew. Even or slightly less into Gardevoir. Giratina can be difficult for it, which is fair enough. Inteleon Urshifu would be a nightmare, I can imagine. Lost Zone is, again, almost at that 50%. Huge win percentage into Palkia, and it does beat Single Strike Lugia. Going into this tournament, I would have said that's the deck to beat. So being able to do that has obviously, yeah, it's put it in a good spot. I would say if you're looking for a deck to get now, moving into the next format with stuff like Paradox Rift, it's got some nasty cards. Iron Hands is, I don't know if they should have printed it. With stuff like the Generator and Flaffy and other things, this could easily get powered up in a turn. And then it turns those matchups against like Lost Zone and Gardevoir into those single prize attackers into, yeah, an easy win. It's going to be like a 60-70% thing. And I don't know. I think Electric's in a good spot anyway, and that card just tips it over the edge. But we will see. I do think, yeah, just in general, that it's just going to get more and more powerful. So if you're looking for a deck that's future-proofed, I would go for this one. But let's take a look at the current deck list. So this is a deck list Andrew Mahone piloted to a very high result at Worlds. Kind of shocked everyone. It wasn't really on anyone's radar at the time. So it's nice to see this making an impact. Obviously with Tandem Unit, you can just get all of this into play first turn. 4 paths does mean they're going to lock you out of the game. A lot of decks rely on abilities. So this is it's very much you get set up and make sure they don't, which can just win you games, as you've seen obviously at Worlds and now at the Pittsburgh Regionals. So it's just been, yeah, it's been a dominant deck. It's one that's only getting better and better. And like I say, as the new sets come out, it's got Zapdos coming, it's got Iron Hands. This is going to be a deck to watch. I think this is one that's just going to move up and up. But currently, where would it sit on this list? I think it's got to be in B tier, honestly. It's proven itself at this point. I don't think it's moving into A. It's definitely not C. I think that's probably a good spot for it. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Let's look at another new deck on the list, Charizard here. It's one that a lot of people want to see work, but we haven't really seen it hit the stride yet or win any big tournaments. So it is going to be very difficult to sort of say where it belongs. So it's sort of even into Chien-Pao, it's even into Gardevoir, not great into the Lost Box and Palkia. Other than that, Inteleon, yeah, again, very good into it. Or I should say Inteleon's good into Charizard. Great into Fusion Mew, obviously, with the weakness. Miraidon Flaffy, again, can struggle to deal with those big Charizards. And it's pretty good into Single Strike Lugia. So it has good matchups. It has some really bad ones. I think, again, this is one that's going to be... It's going to be played and played. And there's no doubt in my mind we're going to see cards released that make this deck better. But in its current position... Let's take a look at a list. So this is a fairly standard one. That's 8 Fire Energy and 2 Turbo. So you do have a chance to attack with Arceus. This is a pretty good list. This is a pretty good version of the deck. Obviously relying on Pidgeot and other things to dig out cards when they need them. It's such a strong attack. It's such a strong Pokemon. It's one that is at some point going to be cracked. At this point, people are still working on it. The list hasn't really hit its stride. And as I say, we've got Paradox Rift coming up, which is a set that's already shown a ton of playable cards, so no doubt we're going to see something special with this deck at some point. The only worry is, like I've already mentioned, stuff like Iron Hands is only going to speed the game up, and you're going to be worried putting those single basic Pokemon with like 60 HP into play, or even evolve ones like Gardevoir. It can take easy knockouts on. Hopefully the game slows down and we can see decks like this thrive, because I would like to see a slower game where we can see these stage 2 Pokemon thrive. But right now, I can't put it in D because I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's a bad deck. I'm not sure any of these would go in D, honestly. Else they probably wouldn't be in the top 10. So I am going to put Charizard in C for now. We can always change it if we change our mind. But let's take a look at Chien-Pao. This, obviously, if you've been watching the channel, is a deck that I've been quite excited for. Let's take a look at its matchups here. It's great into Fusion Mew. Obviously, those decks where it can just take those big knockouts and take 3 prizes, it's absolutely going to dominate. I'm surprised the Urshifu is so low. I guess it can take knockouts and stuff on the bench, but I would say just because you can take easy knockouts into the big VMaxes and take 3 prizes, I would favor Chien-Pao, or at least have it closer to the 50%. In general, not great into Gardevoir or the Lost Box. They're not terrible matchups. The only terrible matchup on here is Palkia, which is 25%. There's so few games with Palkia. It's kind of difficult to gauge. In general, it's fairly standard into most things. Not really going much away from that 50% win ratio. This is the most popular list I could find. Obviously did quite well in Pittsburgh, and this is the list we saw there. So we've got the Bibarel and the Baxcalibur. In my version, I put a Pidgeot in there just for the extra consistency. But this is going all out. It's got all the cards you need in here. It has gone the Pokestop route, which I've said on the channel before. I'm not a fan of Pokestop. The amount of times you see in games or play yourself where you hit a Pokestop and you lose like 3 Pokemon you needed, or you lose supporters or energy, at times you really need those cards. It's almost like a coin flip. It's why I don't like playing stuff with like Lugia and Capture and Aroma. I don't want to come down to those coin flips. I know if you're going to win a lot of games, you need some luck on your side, but yeah, I don't really want to push that luck. But yeah, this deck is very consistent. It can attack with Greninja. It can attack with a ton of stuff. Got a ton of recovery, as we've seen with these Chien-Paos. And yeah, just a ton of consistency. Getting that Bibarel in there so it can keep drawing cards. You're constantly left with an empty hand. So this is a ideal and very consistent, and a list we do see a lot from Chien-Pao. So I don't think it's broke into B yet, which I do think it will at some point. Just the Baxcalibur and lists like that have always been popular. Obviously, we used to have the Archie's Blastoise, which if we had that card now, I could see this being a lot better. But for now, I like it better than Charizard. I think it's in a better place at the moment. I think they're in both similar spots where they've not really hit their 60 yet, and they're not sure what the list should be. So I'm going to put Chien-Pao slightly higher, but still in that C tier. Now, Inteleon Urshifu. This is one that I've not played a ton against or played a ton of myself. Obviously, it's trying to hit those snipes and use Yoga Loop to take a ton of prizes in a turn. And as more and more of these Stage 2 decks come out, it's only going to get better and better. It's had a lot of impact, obviously 11th with Alex at Worlds. There was the Cyrus list at NAIC last year, or no, this year, sorry. It's had some big spots, it's had some big wins. I think it's very situational on the other decks being played. I think with Miraidon coming up, it's going to be more and more popular. I don't know whether it goes... I think it has to go in B, but I'm just not sure where. I think it's a better deck than Chien-Pao. It's a better deck than Charizard. It's good into Miraidon. Is it better though? As the game gets quicker and quicker, I think Miraidon's just going to go up and up. But currently, let's take a look at an Intel list. So this is Alex's list from Worlds. It's really consistent at what it needs to do. Obviously, the 3 Forest Sealstone. It's got 6 Water, the 4 Rapid, and 3 Tower. Just where you can't see the numbers at the bottom there. It does what it needs to do. It can set up. I think it's fun to play. Like I said, I've not had enough play with it to really say, like, do this, do that. Like, this is how the deck should be, or where it relies on. I don't know. I don't think this saves you against Mew, the Giacomo, or whatever it is. I think Mew is just a loss, which it's never great to play a deck where you play against something and you almost can't win. But in general, it's pretty good into most stuff. Like, it's 12% into Mew, which is... And it's 30% into Palkia as well, which isn't great. Again, not many games played though. Yeah, it's a difficult one to say because it's not played very often. It is a very niche and difficult to use deck. So we don't see it crop up as much as some other things. This one is difficult. I might just leave that and then you guys sort of tell me where this goes. I think I'm going to put it there. That's where I think it should go. Miraidon is still proving itself currently. Obviously, it's been incredible at Worlds and Pittsburgh. Let's see how it moves. I'm going to put Inteleon there for now. Let's move on to Single Strike Lugia. So this is a fairly standard list. This is obviously the Single Strike version. This is what Rahul Reddy played at Pittsburgh yesterday. It's got a ton going for it. Obviously, it hits into darkness and fighting, two of the most important weaknesses currently, other than what maybe electric, obviously into Lugia, Pidgeots and stuff like that. It's in a really good spot. Obviously, Path is devastating, but it plays a ton of ways to get out of it with stuff like Pumpkaboo. And in general, it can just take knockouts into most decks. Taking a look at his matchup here, whereabouts are we? It's right at the bottom. So yeah, as you can see, it's incredible into a lot of stuff. There's a few where it struggles slightly. Obviously, Miraidon is probably more difficult than that lets on. But the most important thing is it's got a ton of good matchups. In the current game, I think it has to be one of the best decks. It's definitely top of B. It might be bottom of A. It's difficult. I'm going to go top of B. Maybe we should use this S. It's difficult. It's so tough to say. I think top of B is fine. Like I say, it's great into a ton of matchups. Its deck list has been refined and refined at this point, so it's in a pretty good spot. Let's take a look at Fusion Strike Mew here. Obviously 4 Fusion Energy, 3 Turbo, fairly standard. It's got a few techs in here like Box of Disasters. These can change depending on the current format, which is what makes Mew so good. It can just adapt. It can have these 1-ofs or 2-ofs, but it can always find them because it is so consistent. And it's why Mew, even though we've had Spiritomb, we've had Path, we've had Drapion, we've had all of these things printed to stop it, nothing has. Because it won Worlds, it's still showing up now. It was in the final. Yeah, sorry, Jesse Parker was top 4, not in the final. I'm sure I've already been corrected on that in the comments, but yeah, this deck just keeps showing up. There's no stopping Mew. There will never be any stopping of Mew. With Forest Seal Stone, with the Fusion Strike draw, there's just so much in this deck. So much consistency, which does win games, and it's why Mew is still such a popular deck. Taking a look at some of its matchups here. Obviously terrible into Charizard, destroys Inteleon Urshifu, and then Single Strike Lugia, again, is going to be very difficult, and Chien-Pao. Chien-Pao, not a very popular deck, so I wouldn't worry about that. And the rest, again, are 50-50. It's going to be down to the player. So with that in mind, Mew has still got to be up here. I'm going to put it just below Lost Zone. I think that's a good spot for it. It's just never out of contention. It's always a deck that can keep winning. Now, finally, we've got Palkia. So let's take a look at a list here. This is Cyrus's list, I think. Trying to remember which list I clicked on now. Anyway, this is a fairly standard Palkia list. Obviously with that Articuno in there as well, which I really do like. That's such a good card. Got the cross switcher in there, so it can rely playing other things like Irida or Melanie and still getting that boss effect off. It's got a 2 escape rope again to switch around. One of the few decks that did focus on Lost City, which does make it changes the metagame, because you do need to think and build your deck around stuff like this, because if you keep losing stuff to Lost City like in Gardevoir, then that Mirage step becomes a lot more valuable. So it is a deck that when it's played, you do need to pay attention to it. It's very consistent. Palkia is very powerful. It's got Chien-Pao. It's got Radiant Greninja to attack with. So there's a ton of ways it can attack, but obviously it's not as quick as something like the... When I say quick, it can't just throw a ton of stuff into play and surprise you. This one is very much set up. It's Melanie, it's attaching, it's Palkia VStar, so you're going to see the Palkia come down first. But again, a very consistent list. If we take a look at some matchups, there's a lot of terrible ones. Obviously Giratina, there's Miraidon, there's Single Strike Lugia. The Lost Zone is almost 50-50, but it's got some great ones as well. Into Gardevoir, like I say, with that Lost City, Inteleon Urshifu, and Chien-Pao. So it's and Charizard as well. It's got some great matchups, and it's a deck that is very consistent. So it's definitely better than Chien-Pao. I'm going to put it top of C for now. I think as we see more stuff come out, we could see the water deck have its revival, but I think it's had its heyday with the Shady Dealings and the other stuff. It had Calyrex in there at one point. I don't know if it's still the deck to beat. There's a lot of great decks, as you can see on this tier list. Let me know any you think I missed out of this top 10. Let me know any decks you've been playing or any you want to see in the upcoming format, as I will be doing more deck profiles on the channel. You want to see more Pokemon stuff, more tabletop stuff, make sure you are subscribed. Leave a comment, let me know what you think of this video, and I will catch you in the next one.